We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We have plenty coming up, including: is the only way to sort out the energy part of the cost of living crisis to take the power giants back into public ownership? And why isn't regulation working? You've already been on fire about it, and I've just had a tweet saying unless it's sorted out, there will be public insurrection. Blimey! Keep those thoughts coming in. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Rhiannon Jones.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's coming out to 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Salman Rushdie has been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk after being attacked on stage at an event in New York State on Friday. The man accused of stabbing him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The author's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989, over the publication of the Satanic Verses. No motive for the attack has yet been established. Police are investigating a threat made to J.K. Rowling on Twitter. The post said, "Don't worry, you are next," in response to the Harry Potter author expressing concern over the attack on Sir Salman Rushdie. A spokeswoman for Police Scotland says they're carrying out inquiries. The tweet has since been taken down. Labour will call for the energy price cap to be frozen this autumn as households struggle with the soaring cost of living. Sir Keir Starmer's expected to set out the proposals tomorrow. Tory leadership hopefuls, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are under pressure to block an expected increase to £3,300 in October. The maximum amount suppliers can charge customers is currently at just under £2,000 a year. Well, Rishi Sunak has set out plans to make Britain what he calls energy secure, including boosting North Sea gas production. The former Chancellor says he'd legislate to make the UK energy independent by 2045, as he vows to ensure there's no repeat of the looming winter crisis. Greg Hams, Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, told GB News a long-term plan is essential.
But that's also why Rishi Sunak has laid out a comprehensive plan for energy security going forward, making sure we're energy independent within a generation. That takes a long time to make changes on energy. It takes a long time to commission nuclear power plants. It already takes 10 years or more to build an offshore wind farm. So you need to have a long-term plan as well. Rishi Sunak has got that in place.
Well, Tory MP Ranil Jayawardena, who's supporting Liz Truss in the leadership race, claimed there's been scaremongering around energy prices. He also said the Foreign Secretary plans on creating an emergency budget if she wins.
the energy prices are projected at this moment in time. We will know soon, but we don't have the actual figure just yet. So that's a really important point for people. And I do regret that there has been scaremongering from some quarters on this. Second, I do believe that the pause on the energy levy is a really important immediate relief for families with their energy bills, alongside the cut in NI that will help people. But if elected Prime Minister, Liz has also said that she will hold an emergency budget to see what more can be done at that time.
More than 20,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Government figures show 607 crossings were made yesterday, the third time the daily numbers exceeded 600 since the start of the year. In 2021, over 28,000 crossings were reported. At least 7 people have been injured after a gunman opened fire on a bus in Israel. Shots were fired towards the vehicle heading from the Western Wall to David's tomb in Jerusalem. Local police say the suspect fled the scene before later turning himself in. An investigation is underway. Ukraine's president says Russian soldiers that shoot at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station or use it as cover will be designated special targets. Russia has shown no sign of heeding calls from Western nations to pull back from the plant. This comes as the Ministry of Defence has announced that Russian forces are likely moving to reinforce their southern offensive, with fierce fighting taking place around the village of Pishki in Donetsk. A teenage boy has died after going into the sea at Skegness yesterday. Lincolnshire police have said they received 10 calls within 2 hours to report missing people on the coast. Temperatures will remain high across parts of the UK today, reaching up to 32 degrees as the heat wave continues. It comes ahead of 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms. The Met Office has warned of flash flooding and power cuts. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Our discussion yesterday on the cost of living crisis, and especially those spiralling energy prices, prompted a remarkable flow of comments and thoughts and ideas from you. That will feature very heavily from start to finish in this programme today, because at the heart of the cost of living crisis is the behaviour of the energy companies themselves, and who, if anyone, can get them to face up to the crisis that their prices are causing for ordinary people and businesses. Now, they say themselves that they're the victims of spiralling global prices brought on by rising demand and falling supply, not least because of the war in Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Fair enough. They also face the highest tax rates of any business in the United Kingdom, with a windfall tax on top of corporation tax. And yet, the profits flood in. The regulators seem incapable of doing anything beyond setting a price cap, which does little or nothing to dent those profits. Ministers summon the bosses to meetings at number 10 and, well, they get a bit cross, but that seems about it. And we consumers have very few options beyond switching off when we can and cutting back generally. There may be a choice of suppliers, but many of them have now gone broke, and there's little or no price competition anymore. Now, the newspapers today are talking of a price freeze proposed by Labour and one of the energy companies, and further bailouts from the government. Both seem to be sticking plaster solutions. So angry and frustrated have people become that there is, believe it or not, growing support for something even more profound, politically and economically profound, and that is renationalisation, taking those giants back into public ownership, at least until we are through the worst of it. That is a red rag to a bull for most Tories and a dream come true to the left. It would be costly to the taxpayer and a huge admission of defeat for the free marketeers. But such is that level of public anger that it is making headway. So today, we're going to look at it with open minds, with supporters, opponents and political commentators, to put it in the context of the Tory leadership contest. We'll also be looking to a former Thatcher advisor to see what he thinks herself would make of it all, and her advisors at the time. Let me just give you a flavour of what you've already said. Gareth sent me a message. Just think, if they'd invested in some more reservoirs, that's the water companies obviously, instead, and were supplying lots of metered chargeable water, that might work. That's capitalism. Nick says, state regulators, answerable to whom? None of this has happened overnight. Dereliction of duty, some might say, by the government. And Lynn says water should be nationalised. All revenue plough back into improving the infrastructure. It is eye-wateringly shocking, says Lynn, the salaries, the bonuses and the dividends paid out. Water is essential to life, not to be used for profit. Well, Lynn, you might make that same argument about electricity. So let's get the conversation underway. Joining me first are two old friends with opposing views. Mark Seddon is the former editor of the Labour-supporting Tribune magazine and also, as it happens, a former UN correspondent for Al Jazeera television. And here in the studio with me, another old friend, Rory McCallion. Rory's a freelance author and writer who specialises in business-to-business business, supply chains, innovation and the very future of the UK industry. Let me start with you, Mark, because in fact this conversation slightly began between you and me on social media a few days ago when you were floating the idea of renationalising these giants. Are you actually talking about the generators, the distributors or the whole sector?
Well, I mean, to start with, I was fascinated to see that Rishi Sunak is calling for energy security for Britain. I mean, by the late 1970s, Britain had virtually secured energy security. So you have to ask yourself what's got wrong. A lot of things have gone wrong. And of course, there's been changes in uses of energy. But yes, I think that the big five utilities should be taken back into public ownership. I think the failing electricity companies will have to be. They've already been bailed out. So there's been a kind of public intervention anyway. The intervention for the small electricity bulb cost, I think, something in the region of 2.5 billion, which is what the Trades Union Congress say would cost to take over the big five. So, yes, absolutely. And by the way, this isn't just an argument from the left. As you know, Alistair, President Macron, he's no socialist. He's just renationalised EDF. And here's the thing.
No, I do understand. I know that, and we discussed that point as well. But Mark, let me butt in. Yeah, let me butt in to make this point. It's a crucial point. When you and I and my next guest, Rory, had talked about this way back in the 80s, this was about an ideological statement of intent, the commanding heights of the economy, Clause 4 of the Labour Party. It seems to me, and this is what's shocked me personally, is that this argument isn't coming principally as an ideological alternative to free marketeer Tories. It's coming from Joe and Joanna Public, who've just had enough.
Yes, and I think it's a shame, really, that it got caught up in ideological arguments, frankly, because, to be honest with you, I was a Clause 4 Labour Party person, but it's kind of less relevant now. The issue is what works, as people keep on saying. Well, this so-called market is not working. And clearly, public need now is more important than private greed. And politicians of all hues will understand that to turn around and say to people, put on an extra jumper this winter, put on an extra cardigan or whatever, and by the way, we're going to try and freeze the prices, it's just not good enough. And I have to say to you, I looked at what the Trade Union Congress was proposing, and I'm looking at what the Labour Party is talking about, and I'm thinking to myself, well, look, you're right, Alistair, the sticking plaster approach won't work either. So it's time for big decisions. You cannot have a situation where parts of the privatised energy, water and other utilities markets are effectively run very often by European state-owned corporations, getting subsidies from us, which are being repatriated. EDF customers in France paying 2.5 times less than people do in Britain. It's ridiculous. And
but also hitting Macron and his government for billions and billions in subsidy as well. Let me bring Rory McCallion in there. As I expected all along from Mark Seddon, straight, honest answer. It isn't ideological. It's because people are fed up, but it's beginning to make sense. For those of us who now believe in free markets and competition, it is potentially a catastrophe.
It is. Well, I'm not sure that... I'll answer it in a slightly different way. Mark was talking about public need against private greed, and yes, it's good and it sounds great. Will nationalisation sort out the global prices that we're having to pay? No, it won't. If you're having to buy oil from the Middle East or liquefied natural gas from the Middle East, you're going to have to pay the global
but he's right.
price.
In France, if you do go down that road and the taxpayer is willing to find billions more to subsidise these companies that are in state ownership, then it can be made to work. But at what a cost to the taxpayer?
Well, it can be made to work. And some of the things that we're doing at the moment, there are subsidies going to onshore and offshore wind. Onshore at 95%, 65% of offshore wind and 50% of solar generators have contracts that pay the same wholesale price for their electricity as gas generators receive. Now, as far as I'm aware, the cost of sunshine and wind has not gone up in the slightest. But what they're getting is a massive subsidy, which we are paying for. I would say if you want a competitive marketplace, remove those subsidies. Yeah. Let wind and solar stand on its own, compete in the marketplace. It doesn't need the subsidies, not when gas is at the prices that it is now. Then we'll see a real market and we'll actually start to see prices come down. But you know that my view is that it's the supply side that needs fixing. Yeah. Nationalisation sounds great, but it's window dressing at the end of the day, because as I said, you'll still be paying the same price. What we need is more supply. So we need particularly more nuclear, and everybody will say that that's long term. But Rolls-Royce PLC has got a contract with the American government to deliver an AMR for assessment by the end of 2024. That's not the 10 years that people were talking about. That's 18 months. It can be done quickly.
Mark, would the supply side be addressed if these companies were taken back into public ownership? Because that's another big bill for the taxpayer.
Well, I mean, it seems strange, this argument, in a way, because so many of these questions were addressed. There was something called the Central Electricity Generating Board, which really worked rather well. It invested in innovation. It was forward-looking. It planned for the future. This is what we need to be doing. We need to be having a proper energy policy that looks to the future and that invests. And when people also look at the obscene salaries that some of these energy bosses are paying themselves at a time when prices in Britain are rising so much higher than anywhere else in Europe, something is very clearly gone badly wrong. And that's why I think you're seeing people saying, hold on a minute. You know, you're talking about this massive, it's always used this as too expensive to take the energy companies back into public ownership. 2.5 billion is what was spent on this company Bulb. And it's what it would cost to take the big five into public ownership. That's what the Trade Union Congress says.
Mark, let's be a real.
Mark, I'm going to bring Rory in. Yeah. Bring Rory in.
2.5 billion to renationalise the big generating companies. It isn't a realistic cost. It may be what they're saying that they're going to offer, but that's not what it would cost to renationalise them. It would be a heck of a lot more than that. Now, there is a case. You know, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's a big case for serious intervention, for serious controls. What we've got at the moment is fiddling around about the edges. We haven't got serious intervention, a real price cap. What Ofgem is doing with the price cap is effectively reflecting what is going on in the global market. Now, if we have an intervention to support the prices that generators will be required to suppress, then that would make sense. That would make sense in public money, and that would be addressing the supply side, but it would still, at the end of the day, only be a sticking plaster to get us over this winter. We have got to invest and quickly bring on stream more supply.
I'll come back to you guys in just a moment, because listening to that patiently, and I asked her to do exactly that, is my good friend Emma Wolfe, political commentator. I wanted to hear the two lay out, as it were, their stalls. But as a political commentator, am I right in saying that this is potentially, unless it's got right, a profound ideological point that the public may be nudging us towards without having thought through all of those arguments of the 70s, the 80s, and even Jeremy Corbyn?
I think it's absolutely shocking. What is emerging is how little long-term planning there has been for this. As both your commentators, both Mark and Rory, have said, you know, this is nibbling around the edges, whether you go with what Liz Truss is saying today or last week, or what Rishi Sunak is saying now or next week. The point is, the situation is not working. Energy and water should be, as many of your tweeters have said, should be basic human rights, at least in this country. And what the situation, as Mark says, is not working. You know, we have put private greed before public need. And you know, Alistair, you say people are angry and frustrated. People are desperately, desperately worried about this winter. People are, you know, it's hot now. No one needs their central heating on at the moment. But come the autumn, I don't know what a price cap means. How is it a price cap when there is absolutely no cap on prices, as far as we know, in terms of predictions?
Does it surprise you as well?
The politicians, we have a zombie government at the moment.
OK, that segues neatly to what I was going to ask you next anyway. I apologise for interrupting. But does it surprise you, as it does me, that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss arguing for the leadership of the Conservative Party and therefore, until there's a general election, the Prime Minister, and they may be Prime Minister after that, who knows, not for me to comment, that they've been arguing about whether tax cuts or subsidies or a bit of a bailout here and a bit of a handout there, and to whom, Liz saying higher rate taxpayers won't necessarily get the next one in today's newspapers, that there hasn't been a profound discussion between them over these issues, which Rory and Mark can articulate brilliantly, as indeed can you. But that's not a dicky bird.
But that's happening now, and I think this cost of living crisis has been developing quite fast over the past few weeks, hasn't it? In tandem with the leadership contest. I think that at the beginning, yes, it was about tax cuts or direct handouts, but I think the sense of momentum, the soaring prices, I think people are now, and I include Truss and Sunak in this, are starting to realise actually this is really serious. The fact that Boris Johnson, coming back from his holiday, bothered to have a meeting earlier this week. I know it was a pointless meeting with the energy fat cats, not my words, the energy fat cats. And then yesterday we saw about the £3 billion bonanza being paid out, this morning, to the water fat cats. I think there is a sense, even with the zombie government, Nadhim Zahawi is looking at possible Treasury proposals to do something, government-backed loans for energy companies. I think there's finally a sense of momentum that something has to be done. I don't think it's going to help consumers particularly. I'm not sure. Many of the proposals won't have an effect until January. What happens in October when things get really, really cold? Alistair, I think people are terribly worried about this. And I include people, middle-class people. I'm not just talking about the poorer households. I'm talking about middle-class people who are on a decent income, who simply are not expecting to pay £5,000 a year on their electricity and gas.
Yeah. I'm going to bring Mark Seddon back in at that point and turn the argument, as it were, on its head. I wrote the other day that this was an open goal for Sir Keir Starmer and Labour. You've cited what the TUC want and the costings that they've done, and Rory took a different view, and you can come back to that if you want. But I just don't understand why Starmer is not either saying, yes, this is the road we need to go down, or no, it's not the road to go down. I mean, he's been on holiday, he's had time to reflect upon all of these matters, and he's going to come back and he's going to talk again about price freezes. He's not talking about the control of these great sectors, power, energy and water.
Now, you talked about the open goal. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm over here in Rhode Island in the United States, so I've just been watching at a slight distance and wondering, where is the leader of the Labour Party? The open goal was there, and the person who kicked the ball straight into it, as far as I could make out, was one Gordon Brown, who used to be a Prime Minister and who was calling for the temporary nationalisation, he called for the temporary nationalisation and did, of course, nationalise the banks. So, yes, it's I don't know what it is. I think what it is because at two levels, the Conservative Party leadership and with the Labour Party, they are thinking in terms of ideology. So with Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, they don't dare talk about it because they can't talk about public ownership or co-ops or nationalisation or long-term planning. It's not in their DNA. And Keir Starmer has been doing a great political runner from all of that. Oddly enough, I think I'm right in saying that the Labour Party's policy is still for the public ownership of the energy companies. I don't remember a Labour Party conference voting to change that. So we shall see what Keir Starmer comes up with tomorrow. But as both Rory and Emma have been saying, it looks like a sticking plaster.
Yeah,
it's a sticking plaster approach. We need long-term planning, but we need immediate solutions. And I have to say, Macron nationalised EDF.
You've said that twice now. I'm not going to correct you the second time because your head was bouncing up and down, as was yours. You first, though, on that one. The lack of a proper debate. I'm going to take you right back to the beginning, where I said folk out there are really genuinely angry about it, but so too are the people that you write about and speak to and keep in daily contact. People who are trying to run businesses, create wealth, take us into what Hamish McRae will say later on in the programme, a better future. They must be getting really angry as well.
Oh, and very, very worried. Now, I was going to say about the open goal. If there was a golden boot for missing open goals, then certainly Keir Starmer would have won it some time ago. He's been spent the last 6 months missing open goals. But yeah, in the businesses, of course, do not benefit from a price cap at all. No. In any way, shape or form. And I'm already hearing about businesses that are shutting up shop because they can't afford to pay the energy bills they've got now. Never mind the ones they're going to be getting in October, November. It's particularly, the ones that I've been hearing about in the northeast are fast food outlets. So they're using a lot of energy to cook the food that they're then selling on. They're facing massive price hikes. So is steel. So is any manufacturing organisation that uses energy, that is energy intensive. They are all looking at perhaps having to stop producing.
Yes.
Because they can't
have a 4-minute shower. They either made steel or they don't.
Yeah, I mean, they can't cut it down to three minutes. They are looking at having to stop production because they can't afford the energy.
Is this about the quality of our leadership at the moment? Because I was very taken by something that said there about, compare and contrast Gordon Brown with Sir Keir Starmer. It's true across the political spectrum.
Gordon Brown has been doing the job of the Leader of the Opposition over the past week or so. I think a lot of us were cheering him on. Not lefties, but we're cheering him on. The lesser-spotted Keir Starmer...
Not because you agree with him, but because you were hungry for the debate.
I'm hungry for the debate. I'm hungry for some opposition. Yeah. I did agree with him, actually, frankly, to come out and to talk about freezing the energy prices and things like that. No, I know you don't. But the fact that we had some opposition was very, very important. Yes, Keir Starmer's entitled to a holiday. Of course he is. There's never a good time for a politician to go on holiday. But the fact that front page of The Observer this morning showing that Keir Starmer has finally come out and said something. He wants to freeze the energy prices at their current level, which is £1,970. He's had an open goal, not just for weeks on this. He's had an open goal for months. All this Partygate nonsense. Then the leadership. He's had so many open goals. And he remains... He's not landing. He remains a blank to people. It's such a shame because at this point we really do need an effective opposition. I think a lot of Labour Party members are in despair about who they can support and who is going to speak up. This should be Labour meat and drink, this territory, as you say, Alistair.
I noticed your reaction to that, particularly the Gordon Brown bit, but I want to come back with that in mind to something that you were just saying a moment ago about the people that you work with, and you do this brilliant annual report on the state of UK industry, particularly the new industry. Liz Truss, I think it's in the Mail today, is talking about being all about creating a competitive environment for British business. That's what she stands for. She's a true blue Tory on the economy. Have you heard or read a single thing, either from her or from Mr Sunak, that gives you belief that industrial policy is on their agenda, whether it's public ownership of electricity and water or whether it's start-up companies that you've got a particular soft spot for?
I think I've heard good intentions. I haven't heard any strategy. And sometimes you look at the way that things have been running and you think, you just put your head in your hands. Mark said something about the cost of nationalisation. The water companies, right, which we've been paying out dividends and bonuses, and we see them doing very well at senior executive levels. They've got 57 billion of bonds, corporate bonds. That's debt. Which would take priority over absolutely anything if you tried to buy it. And that was a deliberate, that's a deliberate strategy that's been led by
venture capitalism, taking over companies and loading it with debt so no one else can buy it.
Absolutely. It's a poison pill defence, but even before the attack is there. That has been allowed to happen. Ofwat has allowed that to happen. Ofgem has allowed things to happen. Mark was wrong in saying that the UK's energy prices are higher than anywhere else in Europe. They're higher than France, yes. Okay. And France is now being sued.
I'm going to give Mark the final word because we've only got 30 seconds left. You're coming back at 1 o'clock to rejoin the conversation. Niall Gardner will be with us, arch Thatcherite, so you'll love that as well. Mark, my final point is this, and it's to cut to the brutal politics of it, and you're eminently well qualified to comment upon that. The papers are still covering these stories that core Labour people have had enough of Starmer, not just on this particular issue, but generally. If this is a dummy run for what will be a big issue come the general election, is it your view that Starmer will survive it, or that it'll be somebody else fighting the good fight?
Oh, I think there's going to be somebody else fighting the good fight for the Labour Party. I mean, it is, as both of your guests have been saying too, it's as far as the public are concerned, he is a blank sheet. He's made very little impact, and it is a shame, because I think a lot of us thought that he really did have some of the qualities that could take Labour back to power. But, the Labour Party has to look very hard at itself now. It's not just there for the sake of power and for getting the right people into power. It's to deliver for the people who put it there. And in the case of what we're talking about, the vast majority of members of the public really want decisive action over this energy crisis.
And we've all agreed,
and they're not getting it.
And we want a profound debate, which is what we've tried to start today with you, Mark Seddon, Rory McCallion, and Emma Wolfe as well. You're coming back at 1, as I say, but for the time being, thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy your break, Mr. Seddon, and keep in touch as always. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and high-calibre quality friends, and we've lots more to come on today's programme, including getting the latest from our East of England reporter, indeed from Clacton Beach, on how to stay safe in the sun. But first, let's take a look at that all-important forecast for the weather.
Well, the UK is looking hot and sunny again for many, but with an increasing chance of thunderstorms. Here are the details for you.
Yeah, skies this lunchtime across the southwest will be rather hazy, with perhaps the odd shower possible in the far west. Despite the increase in cloud, it will still be hot.
Southeast England and East Anglia, though, will see plenty of blue skies this lunchtime, making it feel very hot, although some relief can be found nearer the coast.
Eastern Wales will also see plenty of sunshine. However, towards the west, there may be 1 or 2 showers developing.
The Midlands, though, will be dry this afternoon, and in the sunshine, it's going to feel very hot. A reminder that the extreme heat warning remains in force throughout today. That's across many parts of England and Wales.
The sunshine will also dominate across northern England. However, the northeast coast may see some low cloud move in at times. Feeling very warm, though, in the sunshine, with temperatures in the mid-20s.
It's also going to be warm in the sunshine across parts of Scotland. However, western areas will see some scattered thunderstorms develop. The showers may bring the risk of some localised flooding.
Scattered thunderstorms will also develop across Northern Ireland, again with the potential of some local disruption due to the heavy rain. In between, however, there will still be some sunshine. Thunderstorms are then likely in the north and west this evening, but staying dry and warm elsewhere. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of Sunday.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 12:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Some breaking news within the last hour. At least 35 people have been killed and dozens injured after a fire broke out inside a church in Egypt. It's understood most of those killed were children. It's also believed an electrical fire blocked an entrance to the church in the city of Giza, causing a stampede. The President of Egypt has expressed his condolences to the victims' families. We'll bring you more on this story as it develops. Sir Salman Rushdie has been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk after being attacked on stage at an event in New York State on Friday. The man accused of stabbing him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The author has faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989 over the publication of the Satanic Verses. No motive for the attack has yet been established. And police are investigating a threat made to J.K. Rowling on Twitter. The post said, "Don't worry, you are next," in response to the Harry Potter author expressing concern over the attack on Sir Salman Rushdie. A spokeswoman for Police Scotland says they're carrying out inquiries. Labour will call for the energy price cap to be frozen this autumn as households struggle with the soaring cost of living. Sir Keir Starmer is expected to set out the proposals tomorrow. Tory leadership hopefuls Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are under pressure to block an expected increase to £3,300 in October. The maximum amount suppliers can charge customers is currently at just under £2,000. More than 20,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Government figures show 607 crossings were made yesterday, the third time the daily numbers exceeded 600 since the start of the year. In 2021, over 28,000 crossings were reported for the whole year. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. 25 to 1, and you are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Now, as you heard in Rhiannon's news bulletin and in the weather forecast, temperatures are soaring around the United Kingdom. The Met Office has issued weather warnings and urged the public to be cautious this weekend. Around the country, hosepipe bans are in place, reservoirs are drying up, and people are really feeling the heat. Our East of England reporter Ed Crawford was at one of Essex's busiest beaches today, and he sent us this report.
We are on Clacton Beach on a lovely sunny Sunday morning, and I am joined by Communications Manager Will Lodge. Will, can you tell me what kind of numbers you're expecting here today?
It's hard to know numbers because it's such a big and wide area, but we know that this year we've seen probably record crowds coming along the Essex Sunshine Coast to enjoy the great beaches, the lovely attractions, and of course the glorious weather too.
What kind of things can tourists enjoy in Clacton, and is there anything special coming up?
There's loads to see and do in Clacton, whether it's Clacton Pier and Pavilion. We've got Clacton Carnival on this weekend as well, and not to miss in a couple of weeks' time, 25th, 26th of August is the Clacton Air Show. It's one of the biggest free events in Essex and indeed in the region, and a great opportunity to see planes like the Red Arrows, the Blades and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight 2. That's just a taster, but go to clactonairshow.com to find out more.
Well, certainly GB News will be covering the Clacton Air Show. It's going to be a fantastic event. Now, Will, we have to round off with a bit of classic safety advice. We know the government has been issuing advice for weather warnings. What are some of the best ways for people to stay safe in the sun?
So it's about keeping cool, keeping hydrated, and if you come to the coastline, be careful in the sea as well. Respect the water, don't go out of your depth, and don't go around piers, groins, breakwaters, that sort of thing too. They can be some of the more dangerous parts. But by all means, come along and enjoy everything that the Essex Sunshine Coast has got to offer.
Well, that is some fantastic advice, Will. Thank you for joining us today. And we're going to hand back to the studio and probably go for a paddle.
Very good, Ed. sound advice and a splendid hat, if I may say so. Ed Crawford there with that report from Clacton. Now, again, as I said right at the very beginning, and I will do throughout, you have been getting in touch on our big topics of the day, whether we should nationalise the energy and water companies. David joins the conversation. The additional energy cost to consumers, especially those at the lower end of the incomes bracket, should, from October 22 to March 23, be subsidised by a windfall tax on all energy company profits generated from April 22 to October 22. Otherwise, there will be civil insurrection. Nicholas says gas prices are high because people want to pay that for it and it is in short supply. Subsidising consumption only makes that worse through the mechanism of moral hazard. I'm a bit tricky there on options, because what else do you do? Rip out the old gas boiler and bung in electricity? I don't know, but thanks for raising the point. Finally, we've got time for Sam. Sam says Dover Harbour Board ran as a non-profit making company for decades and was very successful. The profits that they generated went back into the harbour and to the town of Dover. So there's a little bit of linkage there if you reflect upon it. Thank you all, and do keep those views coming in. We will, as I say, find more time as the programme progresses, twixt now and 2 o'clock, to read out the best ones. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News and catch up with all of our interviews and all of our conversations. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come, including the drought and the heat wave, the cost of living and soaring prices due to inflation, plus staff shortages forcing farmers out of the industry. We'll be discussing that and its implications in our Rural Spotlight right after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 19 minutes to 1, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. As I said just before that break, we are sticking with the heat wave for our rural spotlight. Now, these exceptional temperatures, whether you're a tourist down in Clacton or sitting in a big city, coupled with the cost of living crisis, the drought and staff shortages, have caused real problems, not least in agriculture. Inflation's also adding to the problems that our farmers face, and many of them are beginning to think they've had enough. Farming is no longer for them. Now, that is bad for an industry that we all rely upon and potentially bad for our environment and the natural beauty of the United Kingdom. So what can we do to alleviate the strain on what is a vital industry? Joining me now is Bruce Jobson, good friend of this programme, good friend of mine. He's an agricultural journalist, and there he is. You've been actually writing about this stuff for quite some time. Do you sense that it is now getting to that critical point because of all of those issues that have come together right now?
Correct, Alistair. Thank you for inviting me back on the programme. Great to see you. Yes, I've been writing about this roughly for 2 decades, going back historically. Now, the last 18 months has changed the dynamics of farming and the environment, and the drought has had a consequential effect above what was happening in farming. And I have to give credit to your programme and to GB News for bringing these issues when other mainstream media and newspapers were not doing that. They were transfixed on Partygate all through January, February, March, April. The real issues affecting the ordinary people was food and how they're going to get it. And I've spoken on your programme, you may remember it, and I've been out on farm with Rachel Sweeney, and we've been doing things with Dougie Beattie, who's done a fantastic job. But farmers are under pressure like I've never known in my lifetime, and perhaps even my father and grandfather's lifetime, because that is the effect. What farmers cannot do is, one, they can't control the weather, and two, they cannot control presently costs. And for example, fuel, diesel fuel, when that started rising, when fertilizer was starting rising, these were things that farmers could not have any control over. And I've said on this programme, and Dominic was standing in for you, that, for example, a growing cooperative in Fife had cut back in February by 26% because the costs were prohibitive. And this is what we're facing. We're facing an absolute, perhaps nightmare scenario that has something which has happened 10, 20 years ago. And that's the sad part. We've not really looked after farming the way we have looked after other aspects.
Bruce, I want to butt in because I buy that and hinted at a lot of it in the introduction, and you've confirmed it for me. But I'll tell you what worries me, and we've talked about it and other people in the sector on this programme, is that the government in some senses seems to be encouraging this exodus, either because they want farmers to rewild instead of grow crops, and a lot of farmers are honked off about that. And the other thing is, in the context of the energy crisis, a lot of farmers I've spoken to, not least down in Hampshire, are saying, do you know, we can make a better turn on our farm and on our land by laying out solar panels rather than growing arable good wheat, barley and the rest of it. And the government want them to do that because it helps on the energy crisis.
Correct, Alistair. But can I take you back to the dying days of Theresa May's administration? And I wrote about this, is that she passed by statute. It wasn't voted for in the House of Commons. It wasn't debated. It wasn't debated in the House of Lords. It was passed by statute to go to net zero. Nobody had any say in it. And even Mr. Hammond had said it was going to cost £1 trillion then in 2019 prices, and 44% of GDP. Farming as such went out the window. To achieve that, Alistair, you have to take out roughly 20%. This is the Office of Statistics, the government's own body, which said 20% of agricultural productive land would have to come out. So what you're seeing is exactly correct. You've got farmers who are turning to planting trees for carbon offshoots. You got multi-million-pound corporations buying estates and land, for example, in Scotland. 50% of the estates that were sold last year were by institutions who are offsetting their carbon. Massive companies doing that, or airlines. I'm not going to mention any. I don't want to get you sued, Alistair. But this is what's happening. And, farmers, it's far better. I know several tenant farmers who are on what we call short-term tenancies, 5-year, 10-year. They're being told to get off the farms. We're planting trees because for the estate or the landowners, it's more productive. And that's the problem that we're having. And I'll give you one little instance. I know I've said it on your programme in the past. 20, 30 years ago, we had 80% self-sufficiency. The government claimed, therefore, we're down to 50%. I think it's below that. Yeah. But if you take 20% out of UK productive land over the next 10 or 20 years, you're going to end up at 30% or 35%. There's no I actually said on Mercy and Bev a couple of weeks ago, what we have is an environmental policy. We do not have a food production policy.
All right, Bruce, going to park it there. I'm grateful for that, and I find it deeply troubling, but thank you for giving the background to it and waving the flag for the consistency. You have been writing about it for a goodly time, and I'm grateful for that. Always good to talk to you, Bruce. Thank you very much indeed. Bruce Jobson there, one of the top agricultural journalists. Well, listening to that, I'm delighted to say, is Alan Jones, who is the president of the National Farmers Union, the NFU, in Cymru. Good of you to join us again on the programme. The picture that Bruce paints there has been worrying for quite some time, but he's basically saying your sector, you as a farmer, but also the NFU that you speak for in Wales, is facing a pretty apocryphal, almost existential moment. Do you agree with that?
Well, not to the same extent. I'm, like yourself, troubled with the comments that Bruce has made, because he's been around this industry for a long, long time, and he's seen a lot, and he's very understanding of it. Now, the point made on embedding food security for this country is absolutely essential. If you embed food security, you then make sure that any policy has to be covered by any implications that it might have on the capacity to produce food. Now, I think that's only a realistic, and fundamental principle that we should have in this country. Now, I know we're in the middle of a climate change crisis, and yes, I understand, we need to make sure that we have policies in place for the long term. But underpinning food security has to be embedded there as well. And there are ways of making it. Farmers have always been resilient, and they've always faced the challenges, and they've adapted. And no doubt about it, we've faced floods, we're facing, drought as we are at the moment, we've faced pandemics, and, all the while farmers are committed to producing food, and that's what their talents lie. Now, government has to work with farmers.
Alan, post-Brexit, one of the great opportunities, as we all know, whether we're for it or against it, was to rethink so much of what we do and how we do it, not least agriculture. Is it not time now to say this movement to rewilding for the environment has got to stop? And however big an energy crisis we fail, but enough is now enough on solar panels in fields when we need, as you've just said, a better step forward on food self-sufficiency. Time to call it a day on those two policies.
Well, let's embed the principle, really, that any policies have to be stress tested against its implications on food delivery. And I think that's the fundamental principle. Now, if we embed that in law, and they have the facility to do so, that would really, be a far better way of, going forward for the future. And I think all the pressures that we're in at the moment can be addressed with proper policies. I would not wish to find ourselves, running out policies which then lead to reduction in food supply. Oxfam warned last year the commitments of governments across the world would have dire consequences on the availability of food. And they stressed that would play out in terms of people, the poorest in society, who would find themselves unable to feed themselves. Now, this is an essential social principle that we should embed. We've got to make sure that we protect that there's food available for all in society at all price points.
You, on behalf of the good farmers of Wales or the NFU at a UK level, put that pretty fundamental suggestion to either Mr Sunak or Ms Truss, one of whom is going to be our next Prime Minister come early September, to say, enshrine the notion of food self-sufficiency in legislation, make it a guiding principle for this country, this whole country?
Well, I think we would be it would be wrong for us not to embed it. So energy security is essential likewise, as is food security. And I think the messages are very, very clear. If anything, sad as it is, the Ukraine crisis has highlighted how fragile the global food situation is. Very few shocks. And as we are seeing at the moment in the midst of a drought, the implications that has on food delivery, plus the fact it is stoking up food inflation.
Yeah.
And, you know, if governments need to address inflation, one of the things that they could make sure they do is enact policies that does not stoke that inflation by higher food prices as well. And there are ways of doing it, because when you consider that fertilizer has gone up 3 times in value, it is, it's a huge confidence test on a farmer whether or not to take these inputs on board. Now, if we do not, it has serious implications for the industry. You can see a contraction. Now, do we want a contraction? Well, no, we don't.
No, we don't.
So policies have to be in place.
We're 100% agreed on that point, but I hope folk heard loud and clear your idea of saying food self-sufficiency, national self-sufficiency, should be enshrined in legislation as a guiding principle of all of what we do. Good luck with that one. I support you. Alan Jones, President of NFU Cymru, thank you very much indeed. Intriguing, absolutely vital contribution to that debate from both of them, Bruce and Alan there. Now, rising fuel costs, expensive animal feed, changing weather, just some of those pressures facing British farmers as the agriculture industry faces buffeting from all directions. We've talked to Bruce about that. We've just talked to Aled from the NFU in Wales about it as well. But here's another factor that you may not have reflected upon. Stress, anxiety, and even depression in the sector have now reached record highs. It's a hell of a tough job, and it's getting a heck of a lot tougher. Warnings of worse to come as they wrestle with growing their product, getting it to your table and to your plate. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody went to meet one young farmer who's taken to TikTok to express her frustration, and she's picked up quite a following.
It started as a lockdown hobby, but 19-year-old livestock farmer Maria Warren has gone viral.
Guys, we've got one lambing!
Her TikTok videos about life on the farm regularly attract 1 million views.
I feel very humbled by the amount of people that are following me, and I couldn't even imagine 30 people in a room watching me, let alone just under 1 million. It's amazing, and to see so many people watching my message and listening and interacting with it is honestly so flattering.
She's aided and abetted by her grandpa, followers from all over the world, wanting more of his Cornish lilt.
Please get Grandpa to tell you that everything is going to be okay. Grandpa!
God damn it, mate, everything's be okay, so don't worry about it.
But there's a message here. Some 84% of farmers under 40 believe mental health is the biggest danger facing the industry, and it's leading to accidents and deaths.
With agriculture in the UK being the highest amount of fatalities in any industry in the UK, it's so important that we put the message out there that it's okay to be tired, it's okay to feel down, and it's okay to feel alone. Lots of people feel like it, and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
25 people were killed on farms in just April and May this year, making agriculture the most dangerous industry in the country. The University of Aberdeen has found most deaths were due to stress and fatigue.
Mine is tractor driving. You're alone, you've got to concentrate the whole time. You're driving a really big machine. I mean, I'm sitting on the front of it and it's bigger than me. You wouldn't get that with a car. So you have got to really concentrate, whether it's on the road or in a field.
And it's when farmers are out in those fields, with only their thoughts for company, that the problem becomes clearer. Farming is a lonely job. The suicide rate for farm workers is 3 times the national average. In fact, each week, 3 farmers in the UK take their own lives.
And so we are actively trying to do and work with those farmers to help them to look after themselves, really, to consider some of the things that would be a pressure to them in an isolated environment, and help them to consider, to talk through and to look at options available to them so that they don't get to that point, hopefully.
So says the Farming Community Network. So says Maria too. She's determined to spread her message of fun and fellowship to her ever-growing audience. You're never alone, she says, and Grandpa agrees.
I joke, boys, been having a whale of a time here.
Jeff Moody, GB News.
Sound stuff there, clever stuff as well. And don't forget, if you are feeling those pressures yourself, there are people out there to help. Not only the farming charities, but Samaritans and the rest of them. Don't endure it on your Todd. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends. We've lots more coming up in the second hour of our programme. More on that top discussion, on the energy crisis and the companies themselves. Is nationalisation really the answer? Goodness gracious me, we'll be discussing what Margaret Thatcher herself might have made of it all with someone who worked with her, cheek by jowl. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, hot and sunny for many, but with thunderstorms developing in the north and west. Here's a look at the details. A mixture of sunny spells and thunderstorms this afternoon across much of Scotland, with the potential for some localised flooding in places, the far north though remaining rather dull and drizzly. Scattered showers and thunderstorms also developing across Northern Ireland, again with the potential of some local disruption due to the heavy rain. Northern England, however, should be largely dry and sunny, but the northeast coast may see some low cloud move in at times. Southeastern Wales will also see plenty of sunshine, however elsewhere there may be one or two showers developing. It will feel hot in the sunshine with temperatures in the low 30s in places. The Midlands should remain dry this afternoon. In the sunshine, it'll be feeling hot. A reminder that the extreme heat warning remains in force throughout today across parts of England and Wales. There'll be some relief for the hot weather near the east coast of England, but inland it'll remain another hot and sunny afternoon with temperatures approaching the mid-30s. A similar story in the southeast with plenty of hot and sunny weather, but further west skies will be hazier with perhaps one or two showers possible. Further thunderstorms are then likely in the north and west this evening, but staying dry and warm elsewhere, and that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, it's 1 minute past 1. Hello and welcome again. If you've been with us since the beginning of the programme at noon, I am Alastair Stewart, and we're here for the second hour, the last hour of our programme. I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio, with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion on the energy crisis and if we should be renationalising our energy companies to help curb the energy crisis. And I'm delighted to say that sitting right there next to me now is a guy who worked side by side with Margaret Thatcher all those years ago when privatisation changed the shape of the British economy. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news. Here's Rhiannon.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. At least 40 people have been killed and dozens injured after a fire broke out inside a church in Egypt. It's understood most of those killed were children. It's also believed an electrical fire blocked an entrance to the church in the city of Giza, causing a stampede. The President of Egypt has expressed his condolences to the victims' families. Sir Salman Rushdie has been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk after being attacked on stage at an event in New York State on Friday. The man accused of stabbing him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The author's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989, over the publication of the Satanic Verses. No motive for the attack has yet been established. Police are investigating a threat, meanwhile, made to J.K. Rowling on Twitter. The post said, "Don't worry, you are next," in response to the Harry Potter author expressing concern over the attack on Sir Salman Rushdie. A spokeswoman for Police Scotland says they're carrying out inquiries. The tweet has since been taken down. Labour will call for the energy price cap to be frozen at just under £2,000 this autumn as households struggle with the soaring cost of living. Sir Keir Starmer is expected to set out the proposals tomorrow. Tory leadership hopefuls Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are under pressure to block an expected increase in October to £3,300. Well, Rishi Sunak has set out plans to make Britain what he calls energy secure, including boosting North Sea gas production. The former Chancellor says he'd legislate to make the UK energy independent by 2045 as he vows to ensure there's no repeat of the looming winter crisis. Greg Hands, Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, told GB News a long-term plan is essential.
But that's also why Rishi Sunak has laid out a comprehensive plan for energy security going forward, making sure we're energy independent within a generation. You know, that takes a long time to make changes on energy. It takes a long time to commission nuclear power plants. It already takes 10 years or more to build an offshore wind farm. So you need to have a long-term plan as well. Rishi Sunak has got that in place.
Well, Tory MP Ranil Jayawardena, who's supporting Liz Truss in the leadership race, claims there's been scaremongering around energy prices. He also says the Foreign Secretary plans on creating an emergency budget if she wins.
The energy prices are projected at this moment in time. We will know soon, but we don't have the actual figure just yet. So that's a really important point for people. And I do regret that there has been scaremongering from some quarters on this. Second, I do believe that the pause on the energy levy is a really important immediate relief for families with their energy bills, alongside the cut in NI that will help people. But if elected Prime Minister, Liz has also said that she will hold an emergency budget to see what more can be done at that time.
More than 20,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Government figures show 607 crossings were made yesterday, the third time the daily numbers exceeded 600 since the start of the year. In 2021, over 28,000 crossings were reported for the whole year. At least 7 people have been injured after a gunman opened fire on a bus in Israel. Shots were fired towards the vehicle heading from the Western Wall to David's Tomb in Jerusalem. Local police say the suspect fled the scene before later turning himself into police. An investigation is now underway. Ukraine's president says Russian soldiers that shoot at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station or use it as cover will be designated special targets. Russia has shown no sign of heeding calls from Western nations to pull back from the plant. This as the Ministry of Defence announces Russian forces are likely moving to reinforce their southern offensive, with fierce fighting continuing in the Donetsk region. And a teenage boy has died after going into the sea at Skegness yesterday. Lincolnshire police have said they received 10 calls within 2 hours to report missing people on the coast. That as the heat wave continues today, with temperatures remaining high across parts of the UK, reaching up to 32 degrees. It comes ahead of 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms. The Met Office has warned of flash flooding and potential power cuts. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. In the 1980s, and I know, because I was there, Margaret Thatcher not only routed Labour, she revolutionised British industry. Huge sectors from energy to telecoms, banking to water were all shaken up, but some were also cut loose from the state and unleashed as private enterprises, with the public encouraged to buy shares in them. It was ideological, absolutely, but it was rooted in the belief that freedom from state control, competition and choice would give customers a better deal, better service, more choice and more price competition. Now, as we look at the cost of living crisis right now, the behaviour of the power and the water companies, you might just be tempted to ask, what on earth went wrong? So that's exactly what I'm going to ask next, and I'm delighted to be joined by someone who I hope can answer it. Niall Gardner, Director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom, and himself a former aide to Margaret Thatcher in those heady days. I've been dying to say this all morning, all afternoon. It wasn't supposed to be like this, was it?
Well, Alistair, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And, of course, you know, the backdrop to our discussion today are growing calls for the nationalisation of energy companies in the United Kingdom. In my view, this would be, I think, an absolute betrayal of Thatcherism. And I know that, of course, Liz Truss, the leading contender to be the next Prime Minister, has flatly rejected this idea, rightly so, because a return to socialism would be hugely destructive. It would actually raise prices, I think, for British consumers. And this idea that the government is better able to, run energy and gas companies, for example. I mean, I think there's no evidence to suggest that the government could do a better job than the private sector.
I understand that, and Emma sitting next to you over there was part of a conversation which I think you were kind enough to listen to earlier with Rory McCallion and Mark Seddon as well. The point that we all made at that juncture was Seddon took a different view, but I don't disagree with you ideologically. I don't think Emma does, although she said she thought that Brown had made a constructive contribution to it. The whole point is, it's not ideologues demanding it, it's the public who are wrestling with water companies that don't give them what they want at heady prices, electricity companies that do give them what they want, but at headier and headier and headier prices. Thus, I repeat it. What went wrong? Is it a failure of regulation? Is it a failure of management of those privatised companies? What went wrong, Niall?
I mean, all sorts of factors are involved here, clearly. Partly, I think, a lack of strategic vision in the UK for the last few decades. I mean, you haven't seen a focus on building nuclear power stations. You've not seen a focus on fracking, for example. You've had this obsession, I think, with the green agenda, which has significantly raised costs. And this drive towards net zero, I think, is absolutely insane, frankly. I mean, this is an approach that is hugely costly for the British public. The approach should be towards, I think, greater competition in the energy sector, cutting taxes, deregulation. This is a far better solution than handing power back over to big government. Big government is never the solution. And Margaret Thatcher's course in the 1980s of mass-scale privatisation was very popular. It was very successful. It led to over 100 countries across the world following the British example. Economic freedom and liberty does work, but unfortunately, I think we've been let down by, I think, some misled policies over the course of the last 2 or 3 decades.
So misled policies on the green levy and stuff like that, but also a lack of vision on investment. Final point I'm going to put to you, and then I want Emma to come in to, as it were, review what you've been saying and join in the conversation, is this, that even in those heady days of the early 80s and telling Sid about privatising and buying shares and what have you, Margaret Thatcher herself and Sir Keith Joseph recognised the need to have effective and pretty tough regulation of those privatised companies. Where on earth are Ofgem and Ofwat in this? Missing in action?
Well, that's a very good question. And where you have privatisation, of course, you have to have, private companies operating in the interests of consumers, in the interests of the public. And of course, there's a big debate over the profits being made by these companies. There's nothing wrong with profit making, but at the same time, companies should be working to cut costs for consumers. And where you have a situation whereby there's some sort of cartel in place, for example, you need more competition. You need more energy companies to actually reduce those overall costs.
Yeah, Emma, you said earlier on in the conversation that when I came up that the image of the problems in these privatised companies being an own goal for Labour, and you said, yeah, Gordon Brown saw that and kicked it through. What do you make of the ideological defence that Niall, and I expected it 100%, made so articulately?
Well, I think Niall's absolutely right. The idea of the government taking over these companies and trying to run them, frankly, they can't even run the Passport Office. They can't even run the DVLA adequately at the moment. I think it's absolutely, definitely not what we want, them running these companies. And actually, Alistair, I would disagree with you. You say the public are clamouring for renationalisation. I don't think the average person understands or knows about between whether their energy firm is supplied by private or public. I think what they want is some sense of control. The public at the moment feel there is absolutely nothing they can do. They can't even switch to get a better price. We're always told we should switch, switch our energy suppliers, switch our water firms. I think people feel really, really desperate, and actually, of course, we need to have the ideological debate. That's really, really important. But we need immediate action. Renationalisation is not an immediate solution. This should have been a discussion decades ago. We should have taken, they should have bitten the bullet on things like fracking, possibly, on things like building new reservoirs. All of these things that needed to be talked about 5, 10 years ago. Politics at the moment is so short-term, and we desperately need short-term, immediate solutions and a longer-term strategy.
But if that is the case, and Niall, feel free to come back in on it as well. I mean, I'm only picking up on what I hear people say and what I see on social media, and I'm the first to say, Twitter isn't the whole world. But what people are seeing at the moment is that combination of not being able to use their hose pipe, whether it's to keep their lovely roses going or grow their fruit and veg and the rest of it, constantly rising energy prices, with the only solutions coming from the political class of being a bit more of a handout from the taxpayer to help you get it through. And at the same time, seeing fat cats drawing big salaries, paying huge dividends and not investing in the infrastructure.
Not investing that money back in. And there's a lot of anger. And people are seeing, as you say, hosepipe bans, prices that are rising, an energy price cap that is no price cap. It simply is not a price cap. They are desperately worried about the winter ahead, and they have no control. And this is what I'm saying. How can they get a better deal? There doesn't seem to be any competition. And report after report, headline after headline, showing the fat cats, the £3 billion, whether it's the dividends being paid to shareholders, often shareholders in other countries. So there's real anger and there's real frustration.
Do you finally point to you, and Hamish McRae is joining us in a moment, who talks about how to think about a better future, which is the title of his latest and rather brilliant book, in my opinion. Do you feel confident? I described you as a Thatcherite, which you are, but obviously by definition, therefore, a Tory, instinctively, philosophically, economically, ideologically. You were very critical and analytically critical of management, investment, the future shape and structure of this industry. You wanted it in private hands, but they simply haven't done a good enough job. How confident are you that come September, be it Liz, who you rightly said is currently the favourite, or be it Rishi, that there will be within that government someone akin to Margaret Thatcher, someone akin to Sir Keith Joseph, someone akin even to Alfred Sherman on the advisory bench, who's going to say, look, hang on a minute, we're missing a trick here. This is the key thing that folk do want sorted.
Yeah. We need to see in the next British government, I think, the ideas of Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, for example, Sir Keith Joseph. We need to see these ideas in practice. I do think that, Liz Truss is actually a radical, revolutionary, Thatcherite-style politician, actually. I've got a lot of hope for the next British government, and the statements she has made in defence of the free market, in defence of basically the ideas and principles that have made the United Kingdom such a great success over the course of many, many centuries. Economic liberty really does work. If Britain is ever to return to socialism, it will absolutely destroy the British economy. That would be the worst possible situation for the UK. Rishi Sunak, frankly, with all his big spending policies, A lot of these policies are basically socialist in style. They're very similar, actually, to the Biden administration in the United States, which is spending vast amounts of taxpayers' money.
Gordon Brown.
Liz Truss, I think is a real Thatcherite who believes in free markets, and that's in the best interest of the British people.
I'm going to bring Hamish McRae into the conversation. I want both of you to stay there because I want you still to join in the conversation. I particularly want you to give me your reprise critique at the very end of it. But Hamish, who people who watch this programme know very well is my favourite political and economic commentator because he bolts the two together, calling it political economy. Principal economic commentator for The Independent, columnist in the Mail, and as I said a moment ago, his latest book is entitled How to Think About the Future. Niall was crystal clear there that he still believes that Thatcherite vision of private competition, the rest of it, is still viable. I don't disagree with him ideologically, but I think that an awful lot of the public are now feeling, hey, guys, it ain't working for me anymore. Are they right or is he right?
Well, I think both are right. I mean, on a very long view, if you're looking 30 years ahead, I can't see this country, or indeed any developed country, going back to having state-owned industries, having your cars made by some state-owned company, airlines run by the state. I can't see any of that. On the other hand, it has not worked as well as we've hoped. And I think there have been failures of regulation, failures of management. In my book, huge failures of losing the building societies and the life assurance companies as mutual. So, I mean, it hasn't been done as well as it should have been. But that doesn't certainly mean that I think politicians would like to run energy companies for the very simple reason that if politicians ran energy companies, they would get clobbered. They couldn't say, oh, gosh, it's these fat cats who, Electricité de France, as EDF Energy calls it.
No, and interestingly, on that specific example, which both Mark Seddon, who I know you know from the Tribune days and the Al Jazeera days, but also Rory McCallion, who you've been kind enough to be on the programme with here, was saying on, if you look at the French example, then nationalisation can work. But they're knocking on the door again of Macron and his government saying, yeah, fine, we'll keep those prices low, but you've got to give us lots more money. There doesn't seem to me to be a way out for the taxpayer in this, either because they're paying astronomically high prices or they're having to pay higher taxes to bail out companies that can't do the job properly. That is bonkers.
Well, I mean, the big failure is not making Europe too dependent on Russian gas and making Britain too dependent on the European gas market. We still produce half of our own gas from the North Sea. Well, it's not beyond the wit of imagination. We could perhaps produce 3/4 of it, or rather more, if we'd invested rather more in that. But if you have a policy which says, in the long term, we should move out of gas, fair enough. We're not going to have gas boilers in our homes, fair enough. But you're not going to get companies to invest in gas if you say we're not going to allow any more gas boilers. So I think that maybe we've had a failure of long-term policy putting perfectly legitimate, correct environmental concerns without thinking of the short-term costs. And we could have done a bit better.
And the danger, that's why your book is so brilliant, because it's forward-looking. We can't undo what's happened between 79 and now. It is what it is. And Niall himself was saying earlier on that there has been a failure in investment, whether it is nuclear power or whether it's reservoirs right across the board. And that was the point that Emma made as well. But the point I want to ask you at this stage of the conversation is simply this. When you get someone like Liz Truss and Rishi, to be fair, both saying that they like the idea of fracking, there's another source of gas that is available, would be cheap, would contribute to our energy self-sufficiency. But in 2022, Liz will say, only if the local people are also happy with it. That's not only a function of investment, that's a function of leadership, Hamish. Are we lacking leadership at the moment as well?
Well, we're certainly lacking leadership until we get a new Prime Minister, that's for sure.
But either in Liz or in Rishi, do you see the potential there of someone who's going to say, no, we're going to smash this, we're going to sort it out on behalf of the voters, the consumers, the customers?
I don't have any particular view about either of the two candidates. I think both are clearly competent people. I think that persuading a country that is conservative in its habits, and literally conservative, doesn't want to build enough houses doesn't want to have fracking, you've got to persuade and bring with you, and then every now and again, when you can see a way of doing it, push something through. So I think you need you need a combination of leadership, but also guile and charm. You've got to offer carrots as well as sticks. And I think that is the key thing we need from our next government is measured optimism, but carrots as well as sticks.
Hamish McRae, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Have a lovely Sunday afternoon, and thank you very much for finding time for us within it. Hamish McRae there. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, so I want to come back to you as I promised. And first of all, you've got all your notes. I was watching it out the corner of my eye. I mean, what great guest, and that's what I love about this programme. But I'm going to give you the final word, because I want you to reprise what I think have been great conversations, all of which you've heard. Hamish McRae is one of my pin-ups, and he's just demonstrated precisely why. He doesn't think that we're going to go back to nationalisation. He doesn't think it's viable, but we have to think smarter and cleverer going forward to make sure it does still work. Now, he's not a Thatcherite. He's an independent observer of these matters, and he writes for the Mail as well. But did you hear from him an agenda for what either Liz or Rishi should be doing, what your party should be doing twixt now and the general election?
Well, I thought Hamish made many excellent
so did I.
Actually. And, I think that, at the end of the day, Britain has a choice. Britain can either, move forward in the Brexit era as a sovereign nation that is focused on the belief in a limited state, limited government, free markets, economic freedom. This is the path I think that Britain should take. It has taken another path, actually, frankly, in the last, 2 or 3 decades. This is a path forward. If Britain is to move towards, a Macron style of economic management in France, or the Joe Biden, approach to spending, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, then I think Britain is on the path to ruin. Because if the UK decides to adopt socialist-style policies, and Margaret Thatcher emphatically defeated in the 1980s, that is, the path to serfdom, as Hayek would have said, actually. So
am I pushing
a very clear choice.
No, because I wrote the introduction both to you and to the whole programme and gave it genuinely a lot of thought. It did strike me as being worth repeating that in '79, Thatcher wasn't only coming up with a fresh economic agenda that had suddenly dawned upon her between 75 and 79. She was reflecting what had happened in the United Kingdom since the heady days of Macmillan, the crazy days of Wilson, and the fudged, complex, inflationary days of Ted Heath.
Yes.
We're kind of there again.
This is a pivotal moment for Great Britain. If Great Britain wants to be a great success on the world stage, truly a global leader for freedom and a prosperous nation, it has to adopt policies at home that advance the principles of liberty and freedom. If it goes in the other direction, hands power to the state, that is a recipe for absolute failure and decline and destruction.
I hoped that we'd get somewhere like that in the conversation, which we now end with you.
Well, I think
a pivotal moment in Britain's economic, political history, post-Brexit, post-79.
Pivotal moment, but also quite a dark moment. And I think Niall's right that, we should expect great things from our next government. And I'm very, very worried. I think the calibre of our politicians and of these leaders, these fat cats, so-called fat cats, is really poor at the moment. I agree with Hamish that you need to push through carrots and sticks. Other countries pay people to have reservoirs built near them, or to have fracking, or to have nuclear plants near them. I think there's been a lack of that for decades now. And I think that we just need to lead people, persuade them, have some vision, excite people, lead them in the right direction. Whatever it is, we need to do something. We can't just drift along. We cannot just carry on like this. And I don't have the same hopes for you about the star, Liz Truss as a political star, but I think that, you know, they need to grasp the nettle. None of them are of the calibre of Margaret Thatcher. Absolutely none of them.
All right. Hamish and Absentia, if you're still there, great. If you're not, well, thank you anyway. Niall Gardner and Emma Wolfe, thank you both very much indeed. It all achieved exactly what I hoped for. And we'll have time at the very end of the programme to see whether it hit the nail on the head for you guys and gals who are kind enough to watch and listen to us. But in the studio, thank you both very much indeed. We've a fair old bit left. We've got about half an hour to go here on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, Labour today have, as you've heard several times so far this afternoon, laid out their plans, calling for the energy price cap to be frozen this autumn in a bid to help with the cost of living crisis. But where does that leave the regulators? And what's gone wrong with them? We'll be discussing that next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, hot and sunny for many, but with thunderstorms developing in the north and west. Here's a look at the details. A mixture of sunny spells and thunderstorms this afternoon across much of Scotland, with the potential for some localised flooding in places, the far north though remaining rather dull and drizzly. Scattered showers and thunderstorms also developing across Northern Ireland, again with the potential of some local disruption due to the heavy rain. Northern England, however, should be largely dry and sunny, but the northeast coast may see some low cloud move in at times. Southeastern Wales will also see plenty of sunshine. However, elsewhere there may be 1 or 2 showers developing. It will feel hot in the sunshine with temperatures in the low 30s in places. The Midlands should remain dry this afternoon. In the sunshine, it'll be feeling hot. A reminder that the extreme heat warning remains in force throughout today across parts of England and Wales. There'll be some relief for the hot weather near the east coast of England, but inland it'll remain another hot and sunny afternoon with temperatures approaching the mid-30s. A similar story in the southeast with plenty of hot and sunny weather, but further west skies will be hazier with perhaps 1 or 2 showers possible. Further thunderstorms are then likely in the north and west this evening, but staying dry and warm elsewhere, and that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 1:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. At least 40 people have been killed and dozens injured after a fire broke out inside a church near Egypt's capital, Cairo. There are fears most of those killed were children. It's understood the electrical fire blocked an entrance to the church in the city of Giza, causing a stampede. The President of Egypt has expressed his condolences to the victims' families. Sir Salman Rushdie has been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk after being attacked on stage at an event in New York State on Friday. The man accused of stabbing him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The author's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989 over the publication of the Satanic Verses. No motive for the attack has yet been established. That as police investigate a threat made to Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling on Twitter. The post said, "Don't worry, you are next," in response to the writer expressing concern over the attack on Sir Salman. A spokeswoman for Police Scotland says an inquiry is underway. Labour will call for the energy price cap to be frozen this autumn at just under £2,000 as households struggle with the soaring cost of living. Sir Keir Starmer is expected to set out the proposals tomorrow. Tory leadership hopefuls Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are under pressure to block an expected increase to £3,300 in October. And more than 20,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Government figures show 607 crossings were made yesterday, the third time the daily numbers exceeded 600 since the start of the year. In 2021, over 28,000 crossings were reported for the whole year. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to risk being told off in my ear, but I've just received a brilliant tweet which ties together two things that we've been talking today. It comes from someone who calls himself JFK, not that JFK, obviously, but anyway, JFK says, "The slow suffocation of the farming sector is exactly the same as the failure of successive governments, starting with Labour, to maintain energy security. Just as we're desperate for energy now without food security, we'll be desperate for food in 10 years' time." Thank you, JFK. Now, today, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer sets out in the newspapers what he's going to be saying early next week, his plan to deal with the cost of living and energy crises, calling for an energy price cap freeze on Monday. The cap, the maximum amount that suppliers can charge customers for average use, is £1,971 a year. UK energy regulator Ofgem has said it is possible that suppliers could raise customers' direct debits before the new cap comes into effect in October. All Ofgem seems to be doing is increasing the cap, so what's gone wrong with regulation? And I'm delighted to say that my next guest will hopefully be able to answer that. It's Malcolm Grimston, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at the Great Imperial College. Great of you to find time for us this afternoon. Thank you so much. Just to precurse it, in case you didn't hear it, we've had a really great conversation with all sorts of folk about, as it were, the theory and practice of privatisation as opposed to nationalisation. So that's the context. But as I said to Niall Gardner, Thatcherite, even herself recognised the need to have good, strong regulation. What's gone wrong?
There's been a couple of reports recently that have looked into this in some detail. Ofgem, I think, has made two quite serious mistakes. Its general remit is to protect consumers now and in the future, but it allowed a lot of new entrants, supply companies, to come into the market over the last few years without really making sure that these companies had a financial base that would allow them to deal with difficult times. So what happened in effect was that companies could enter, they didn't need much in way of assets, that they could pay on to customers if things got very difficult, and they ended up buying gas on the cheap. The big companies buy some of its gas in the immediate short term, some of it's gas for delivery in a year's time, even some of it's gas for delivery in 3 years' time. And that means if you do get a sudden increase in the gas price, then at least those companies have some of their contracts that were signed at the prices before that increase took place. The new companies simply went in without any financial backing, bought gas on the cheap, and then when gas went through the roof, they had absolutely no resource, and they ended up going bust because the price cap meant they couldn't pass those costs on to their customers.
And a decent regulator, Malcolm, at that point would have said to these companies, and I was with one of them as well, so I do have some experience of it as well, would have said, sorry guys, you don't have the depth of working capital, you don't have the management experience, whatever it might be, to come and play our game.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a slight tension for free marketeers in this, that although more companies looks like more competition, and prices were brought down a little bit because of that. The problem, though, is if you let a free-for-all happen, then when things do go wrong, we all end up suffering dreadfully. And the other thing that seemed to happen was that these companies, the way it works with direct debits is that we pay money during the summer when we're not using much energy, we build up a surplus, and then that money goes to pay for the energy bills over the winter. So we don't end up having very low bills in the summer and then getting caned in the winter. But the companies weren't made to ring fence those customer deposits. They were allowed to spend them on their ongoing business. So, of course, when they went bust, there was no money anywhere in the pot to give back to those customers who had already paid in advance, as it were, for electricity or gas that they hadn't yet received.
Let me shift you on a bit. We've got a minute left, Malcolm, and I want you to come back on the programme because there's a lot more we can talk about on this. But last minute, if you would, on the generators as well. You've talked about the distributors, and I've got that loud and clear. What all of my other guests, be they from the left or the right, were saying, the regulator should have made sure that those generators were investing enough, be it electricity or actually water, it applies too to reservoirs, before they distribute billions in dividends to their shareholders. That should be a condition of maintaining that licence from Ofgem and charging those higher prices. Did somebody take their eye off the ball?
There's 2 different issues here. In water, water is a natural monopoly. There's no point in having competing reservoirs. So we buy all our water from our local water company, and that company should be regulated. And in those situations, a regulator could and should, although didn't, insist that they were making probably more investment they did. But they did insist in investment. Investment did increase after privatisation. The problem with electricity is when you have companies in competition, that it destroys the point of competition if you're going to say to companies, but if you do make money, then we're going to levelise the playing field with the companies that aren't so efficient, and by making you make certain use of your money. Ideally, in a market, companies see prices going up, they invest, that gives them some profit, and it brings the prices down, and regulation can be relatively light touch. What unfortunately we've got is a system where we'll get the impression that companies are being told, you've got to make a huge amount of investment, but if you do, and you start making money off it, we'll have a windfall tax on you, and you won't make you won't make the profits necessary to generate the next level of investment. In that situation, we end up with the worst of both worlds, of high prices and insufficient investment.
Perfect point to park it, and I'm grateful for that, but I wasn't floundering around when I said come back and carry on the conversation. We need more time. We will have it next time, I promise you. But for the time being, Malcolm Grimston there, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great afternoon. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I need another hour. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including with Liz Truss reportedly ahead in the race to be the next Prime Minister. One MP switching his allegiance to support her. We'll be unpacking the latest from the leadership race with an MP and a guest from the Conservative grassroots. That's right after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. As always, we look for savings for you. I recently changed mobile phone providers and I got a great deal and a £100 welcome bonus. Joining me now is David McClellan, technology journalist and guru on all of the best deals and how you can look after yourselves as the key consumers. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. You've been a consumer champion, as I say, for quite some time. But are we in a kind of purple phase now where even people like me can go out there and lo and behold, all I did was change the chip and I saved an awful lot of money?
Well, I think you might have an angle on that because, you know, there is a lot more competition that is easier to access now. You only have to look online and take a look at the various comparison sites that are available. There are more companies trying to give us better deals than ever before, and comparison sites make it very, very easy for us to find what those deals are. And also, you know, in media, we say we're in a bit of a silly season at the moment. Right now, there are some extraordinary deals. Lots of manufacturers are launching their newest gadgets, whether it's mobile phones like I know you've just picked up, or whether it's things like smart thermostats, other smart tech in our homes. There are some remarkably good deals at the moment if you want to do the legwork and hunt them out.
Exactly right. And as you say, driven very much by the cost of living crisis, and hurrah for that, anything that can help out. Let me play devil's advocate as well, because I am not the most brilliant person when it comes to trawling through those price comparison websites, be it insurance, mobile telephony, and my eldest son actually helped me, hand on heart, I will admit that. What have we got to look out for particularly if you're not that user savvy, tricks of the trade that some of these suppliers may use just to try and tickle a little bit more out of you? What should we be looking out for?
Well, so look, the comparison sites are very good at aggregating a lot of the deals into a single window in front of you, but they don't always pick up everything. So as I was on here talking about a few weeks ago, particularly if you're looking at your phone and broadband, the comparison sites won't look at some of the social tariffs. So if, for example, you are receiving benefits, you can get some extraordinarily good deals from the main providers, but those deals you won't find on comparison sites. For example, I was looking around also at mobile phone deals right now by going direct, and really there are only a handful of main mobile phone providers in the UK. By going direct, you can find some really attractive cashback options, like I know that you found with your recent deal. Also, if you're willing to trade in your old phone, we have billions of pounds worth of old tech lying in drawers. If you upgrade your phone, what do you do with the old one? Well, very often we don't throw it away straight away. We put it in a drawer and keep it just in case our current one breaks or we need to hand it down to a family member. But if you're willing to trade that device in, you can sometimes get hundreds of pounds back. You don't always see those offers on comparison sites. So knowing who the main players are and going directly just to see if they have any bespoke offers can sometimes really pay dividends.
So that seems to me to be the headline, and I'm going to end on it so that you can clarify it to make sure I haven't got it wrong. is that unfortunately it's a little bit like local suppliers of various products. You go to a local shop, see what's on offer, and then go online and buy it because it's cheaper that way. With mobile telephony, go onto a price comparison website, find what looks like the best deal, and then phone that supplier up direct.
Yes, and sometimes by phoning up directly or phoning up your current provider and haggling, seeing if there's a better deal if you deal with a human being. Sometimes that's when you can get an offer that's going to be bespoke to you that no one else is going to be able to offer you.
David, you're a star, and I'm so glad you found time for us. We like a bit of haggling. It's always very, very good indeed. David McClellan, technology journalist and consumer guru. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us. We'll see you again soon. Hope you found that helpful. Now, as I said just before the break, we're going to give our final say to Justin Tomlinson MP, originally a Kemi Badenoch supporter in the Conservative leadership race, and also to Don Williams. Don's the chairman of the Hampstead and Kilburn Conservative Association. But first of all, when I hosted the People's Forum this week, Liz Truss had something quite interesting to say about former leadership contender Kemi Badenoch.
Kemi, I've worked with her as Women and Equalities Minister. You know, we've taken on a lot of the agenda of people who were trying to deny that women were women and so on. So I think she's absolutely brilliant, and I would definitely want her as part of my team if I am successful.
Well, there we are. As I say, joining me now is Justin Tomlinson, Conservative Member of Parliament for North Swindon, who was originally backing Kemi Badenoch, and also joining us both in conversation, I'm delighted to say, is Don Williams. There he is on the right of your screen, the chairman of the Hampstead and Kilburn Conservatives Association. Justin, first of all, so Kemi comes on board. Next day she says, hurrah, Liz could be the best one going forward. Have you made that decision yourself yet?
No, I've not declared yet, but I'm not surprised that Liz, should she win, is going to end up picking Kemi Badenoch into the cabinet. When I chose to support her, I didn't really know her personally. I'd just seen her perform as a minister on select committees at the dispatch box, and she was a cut above. Her ability to engage, her ability to hold a position on an argument. And whoever wins, we've got to have Kemi as part of that team, because we're not a presidential system. We are a cabinet-based government. As we rapidly head towards the next general election, we're going to need our very best performers so we can be on the front foot. And I have no doubt whoever wins, both will be keen to put Kemi into a key position in the government.
Don, I think you have made your mind up. You're not a member of Parliament like Justin, but equally importantly, in some respects, even more importantly, you're chair of a local association and you also have a vote. Who do you fancy in this race?
I haven't fully made my mind up yet, but I will give you a little hint. I really like the idea that we should be cutting taxes, because we are quite a highly taxed country, and we should be looking to what our priorities are in terms of spending. And I think that will give you quite an indication, although I have seen Rishi Sunak, and he spoke very well in front of Hampstead and Kilburn Conservatives. And I have seen also Mike Freer speaking for Liz Truss just 2 days ago. And I'm close to making my mind up, but I think you know where I'm leaning.
Yeah, no, I've got you absolutely. The only caveat I would put is that if you were in the Rishi camp, you might say, well, he's going to cut taxes too, but only when he's defeated inflation. But that's for the birds and that's for the advisors. I want to put this to you both. And it's a reflection of what we've spent the bulk of the programme talking about today. And it's basically the big economic ideas that we either need to hear from Liz or we need to hear more from Rishi on. And it is that the real pain that people, and you know it in your own constituency, Justin, and you know it, Don, in Hampstead and Kilburn, that people are feeling with power bills, energy bills, water, hosepipe bans and the rest of it. A lot of folk out there are talking about renationalising these great industries. What is your view, Justin? Can that be seen off by either or both of these candidates, or is it colouring the race?
Well, from my perspective, what we've got to get better at is when we do provide support, and it's clear whoever wins, there is going to be additional support on top of the £37 billion we've already set out, that we get far better at communicating what that support is, because I've lost count of the number of emails, letters and phone calls I've dealt with constituents who said, you haven't done anything yet. And then when you set out that 37 billion, whether that's the council tax rebate, the £400 off the energy bill, the top-ups if you're on UC, a pensioner or have a disability.
Yeah.
So whatever we do coming forward, we've got to be a lot simpler. And there's lessons that can be learned from during COVID. When we did things like furlough, people understood it. And whatever greater people than me come up with, whoever wins, they're going to have to come up with something that the public understand, because it comes at a cost. And ultimately, whatever we do, we're either going to have to gain through growth, savings, or tax changes further down the line. So we've got to make sure that money is well spent and communicated so people can see a tangible difference.
A fascinating point, Don, there from Justin on the communication of what's being done. What's your take, Don, on this broader point of economic policy? You mentioned at the top of your first answer tax cuts, but the idea of saying, and Liz has rejected the idea of renationalisation, hardly surprising, and I'm sure Rishi would take the same view, but it's out there. Folk are talking about it. Folk are so angry, they're saying, look, we might even consider that.
I just had a friend from America call me. I mean, I very much agree with what Justin said. And I had a friend from America calling me, asking me what's the inflation rate now in the UK, because he used to live here. And I said about 9% thereabouts. We're looking, it might even go up. And he said, oh wow, it's the same as we have in the States. I noticed that they're not talking about nationalization, and I know I've lived through the nationalized industries, and they were a disaster. So I'm not sure that's going to solve anything at all going forward.
But do you also pick up on Justin's point, and then I'll give him the final answer, because I was very taken by what Justin just said, sitting there in the middle of the screens, about the stuff that's been done. You go right back to the spring statement, and it was Rishi who was bunging money around as if there was no tomorrow. That point of communications, if, Don, you and people, like-minded people, think that nationalisation is wrong, then goodness me, Rishi and Liz have both got to be louder and clearer about that, have they not?
Exactly. Very, very true. And remind us of what it was like when British Rail was British Rail and was nationalised. Remind us what British Telecom was like when you couldn't even get a telephone. Remind us, you know, the reality was it wasn't perfect, it wasn't great, and it was a disaster. And I had to live through it, and I don't want to live through it again. What we're going through now is so much better. It can be improved, but it's so much better than what we had to live through when I was a youngster.
Yeah. Don, real pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for finding time for us. I said final word, Justin. Is there one other policy that if Liz speaks out on it with clarity, or Rishi does with clarity, that will swing you? What are you looking for most of all? 30 seconds.
It's that ability to engage with the public so that we can have a good chance of getting that unprecedented fifth term. I have to pay credit to you. The People's Forum is something that we needed at the beginning of the contest. We kind of rushed the MP selection bit. And then now we're getting into these proper bits, because the hustings at the time were sort of quick, 30-second answers for each candidate on a few policies. Yeah. You really did explore things, that People's Forum. If only we could have done that at the beginning before we, the MPs, voted, and then a faster process for the public, because frankly, it's taking too long and there's pressure on both teams to make new announcements when perhaps we've probably exhausted the announcements. Would have been a far better way. We need to learn from this for a future, but hopefully not too soon, contest.
Bingo, great point to end on. Justin, thanks very much indeed. And if you've not caught Dan Hodges in the Mail today, I'd read it. Whoever wins needs to know they're going to be Prime Minister. Start talking to the public rather than just to the party. Justin and Don, thank you both very much indeed. Great to talk to you. I promised that we'd find a bit of time for some more of your comments. They've been brilliant today. Colin says the trouble with Labour government nationalisation after the war was over was compensation of the former owners, which must not happen if we nationalise again. At the the start of state industries had a social pricing policy below cost, then a welfare policy of break-even, and finally an economic policy which was profitable but effectively monopoly capitalist. And finally, Neil, I'm becoming increasingly frustrated by apologists for Margaret Thatcher saying that there's nothing wrong with privatisation. Oh yes, there is. The privatised owners have a requirement to optimise profit for shareholders. This may be in conflict with the needs of the state, and the state must prevail. What about the public and the consumer? I'm on their side. That's all we have time for this weekend. See you again next weekend. Bye for now.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, hot and sunny for many, but with thunderstorms developing in the north and west. Here's a look at the details. A mixture of sunny spells and thunderstorms this afternoon across much of Scotland, with the potential for some localised flooding in places, the far north though remaining rather dull and drizzly. Scattered showers and thunderstorms also developing across Northern Ireland, again with the potential of some local disruption due to the heavy rain. Northern England, however, should be largely